Good afternoon and welcome back to Music 110, Introduction to Audio Technology. I am Dr. Clint and I am your host as always. Today we are moving past all of this theoretical stuff and actually digging into using the digital audio workstation, the DAW, to create music. So this is an exciting day for all of us. This is transitioning into the second half of the course, which is really much more focused on just being creative and experimenting with these tools. So today, what I'm going to be doing is just introducing you all to some techniques for manipulating waveforms within Studio One or whatever DAW that you're working within. This will be these techniques are going to be building up towards your first creative project, where you are going to be making a sound collage. So you're going to be collecting audio from various sources. It could be things you record, but really, I'm encouraging you to search around for sources of audio that you want to combine into interesting ways. I'll be presenting all of these techniques for combining audio and manipulating audio itself. But this first creative project is really about learning techniques for manipulating waveforms within a digital audio workstation. And it will culminate in your own sound collage, which will be a composition that you generate within within Studio One or whatever digital audio workstation you're working in. So today we're learning the big basics of waveform techniques. This is going to be different than mixing, than signal chaining audio through effects. We're just looking at ways to manipulate and change the waveform itself. So let's start by looking at all of the techniques that we're going to be covering today. So when I say waveform techniques, I'm talking about processes that we apply directly to waveforms. There are other you will learn very soon that there are other processes involved in mixing, in mastering. There are all sorts of other processes that happen with audio. Right now, we're just focusing on processes that we apply directly to the waveforms themselves. These processes include splices, fades, pitch shifts and speed changes, time stretches, reversing, gain adjustments, and what is called normalizing. So I'm going to cover all of these, demonstrate all of them within Studio One today, and by the end of it, you should have you'll have a bunch of techniques to play around with as you start collecting audio, dropping audio into Studio One, and toying around with it and experimenting. So I'm encouraging you to, after you've viewed this lecture, to get some audio, getting some audio into your into Studio One, and just kind of start experimenting and see what you come up with using these techniques. So all of these techniques are applied directly to waveforms, but they also have a pre-digital history. So what is that pre-digital history, and why am I bringing this up? I think that if we understand the way in which these different techniques and the terms that we use to describe them when we're working within a digital audio workstation, as derived from analog techniques, it becomes easier to conceptualize what's going on when we're performing any of them. So, what is the pre-digital? And of course, as we've learned so far in this class, when we say pre-digital history, we're really usually talking about analog, the analog history of waveform techniques. Well, it all goes back to a razor blade. So these techniques are all derived from physical processes that people did when they edited and edit, because people still do this craft, analog magnetic tape. So the reel-to-reel tape that recording was done on before computers kind of took over, and the way that edits were performed were with a razor blade, with just a simple razor blade here. So how did that work? What we see here is a splice. We see two reels of tape, right? One on either side. We see a razor blade. And then these reels of tape are going through this metal groove here that you can see. And you can see that the reel that is on, looks like, yes, the reel that's on the right is going through this groove on this metal plate, this metal block, and it's laid over the top of the reel of tape that is on the left. And they both are going through this groove, and and somebody has lined them up. And then you have these two sort of, one is diagonal and one is perpendicular, smaller grooves. Now, those grooves are there so that you can make the exact cut that you want and have it be the same cut on both reels of tape. So the razor blade would fit into either of these grooves, whichever one you want, whatever type of splice you wanted to make, whether it be a hard splice, which is the perpendicular one, or a soft splice, which is the diagonal one. So that way you're making an exact cut so that both reels, the two reels of tape that you are splicing together, are cut in the same way, the same angle, all of that. So what ends up happening then is you cut at that point, and then you literally tape them together at that splice point. To give you a sense of this, here is splicing in action. What we call this grooved piece of metal is a splicing block. Now, these two, it's hard to tell on this particular splicing block here, but it's easier to see on this one. There are two types of splices here. Sometimes a splicing block will have up to 3 or 4, and if you have more than 2, it'll just be more angles. So you'll have a 90-degree angle, like is seen here, and a 45-degree one, but you might have maybe a 30-degree angle and maybe a 20-degree angle, something like that. And the different angle is going to determine the length of the crossfade between the two splices. So imagine it like this. The tape is going by, just like a record is rotating. The tape is going by and is being read by a sensor. And if you're splicing these two pieces of tape together and you splice them at an angle, as the tape passes by the mechanism that reads the tape, it's going to read, if we're going in slow motion, it'll read just a little bit of the tape on the right and a lot of the tape on the left. And as it goes through that splice, if it's a splice at an angle, you will crossfade from tape A to tape B, depending on how much of the spliced together tape, how much of it at any given moment is taken up by A or B. So these angles are crossfades. And the reason they're crossfades is because the tape is going by at a consistent speed. If you have a 90-degree, if you have a 90-degree angle, there is no crossfade. It just, the tape goes by and it immediately switches from one recording, one take, one piece of audio to the other. If it's angled, then it's going to have some amount of crossfade. So, so splices and fades grow directly out of razor blade technique for magnetic tape. Reversing, pitch shifting also comes directly out of reel-to-reel tape. This would be much more intuitive, I think, right? So if you're going to pitch shift something, you're going to slow down the speed of the tape. If you are going to reverse something, you just change the direction of the tape. So all of these techniques are actually derived directly from reel-to-reel razor blade editing, or just reel-to-reel tape editing techniques, except for normalizing. And I'll explain that when we get there. So all of these are derived directly from analog techniques, and I think that will help you as you are trying to remember the difference between the techniques and as you are practicing them yourself. All right, let's get out of these slides, and let's just move over to Studio One and start testing some of them out. Okay, so here I am in Studio One. I have, right now I have audio that I took from the Blackboard site that, I have audio that I took from the Blackboard site that I uploaded for all of you. It's that reading of the to be or not to be speech from Shakespeare's Hamlet. And I've just kind of started copying and pasting segments of this speech and putting them into a new order. This is what we were kind of working on during the last time we met. So this is what I have. This is what I have as far as like reordering the waveform and splicing it into a different order. You'll notice that I have two tracks. Before I press play, you'll notice that I have two tracks. This top track, which is titled Hamlet, is the track that I just dragged and dropped the wave file into here, and I have it muted. So I will not hear the top track. I will just hear this thing that is this second track, which is now called track. I can if I wanted to hear both tracks at the same time, I would unmute, but I really just want to hear this bottom track, and this is what I have so far.
No more dream the lost conscience, the undiscovered country. No more dream the lost conscience, the undiscovered country.
Now you notice that I have it looping, and the way that I was able to achieve that, there are a couple ways to do this. The keyboard shortcut, and this is true in Mac. I'm pretty sure it's also true in Windows, but it might be something slightly different. But the keyboard shortcut is whatever audio I have selected. If I press Shift P, it's going to adjust this bracket that I see on my time ruler up here. Whatever is between this bracket is going to be looped. So watch this. When I press play, I'm going to press play.
No more dream, 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 dream.
Now, what's useful with looping is I can just choose one section and listen to it play back as I'm making adjustments, so I don't have to keep pressing play. In order to make sure it's looping, I have to activate the loop function, which is down here by where I can press play, record, rewind, all of this. These are my playback controls. If I press this button again, the loop bracket becomes unhighlighted. It is no longer blue, and you will notice that
no more dream the lost
it's no longer looping. So this is how I can toggle back and forth between loop mode
dream
and let it just go.
the lost conscience,
Okay, so that's looping. We'll learn that keeping track that there are all sorts of ways that we can tell Studio One about like important moments within the time frame of our piece by giving it indications along the time ruler up top. For instance, if I just wanted to make a wave file, if I just wanted to write to disk a wave file that was, I should say, okay, the keyboard shortcut is Shift P. Another way to start your loop is to just go to the transport menu, and then you would just select loop selection. I already have that selected, so it's not going to do that for me. But that's another place to find your loop. So if you just click loop selection, for instance, here. So if I just press loop selection, I will now just loop this one splice. I'm going to go back to this. Okay, so if I wanted to just write or bounce down or mix down just this 3 seconds of audio here, I would be able to just go into Song, Export Mixdown, and if I have between loop selected, then whatever it is mixed down to a file, this would write a wave file in this location or whatever location I wanted to write it to. It would just be the portion of the Studio One session that is found in between the loop brackets. Okay, so here I have, I've pulled this out, and now I want to start looking at these different techniques. So, 1, splicing. So how did I go about splicing? I mentioned we started to talk about this in the last lecture, and we talked about it a little bit in the last time we met. The playhead. So when I am moving about along the time ruler, so this readout of numbers up top is where I am at any given moment in time in the Studio One session. Right now, I have it set up to read seconds, minutes, and seconds. I could have it read bars and beats. So now, instead of reading minutes and seconds, it's reading bars and beats at a tempo of 120. I could change that tempo, and you will see that as I'm increasing the tempo, the bars and beats are becoming closer together. As I'm decreasing the tempo, the bars and beats are becoming further apart. You will also notice that as I'm changing the tempo, all of my audio splices are snapped to, or they stay where they are. They are snapped to the measure that they are within. So if I'm increasing the tempo, that means the beat, the 1, 2, 3, 4 of the music is becoming slower. So as I'm changing this, the splices of audio are staying where they are in the measure, but that means that they are being stretched away further apart from each other. So I'm going to bring this back to 120. And Okay, so we're back to 120, and I'm going to just go back to seconds because I'm not particularly interested in at this point in trying to make a clear, consistent rhythm. I'm kind of more interested in just making a new sentence or making something that has more of a speaking like flow to it. I have also, in order to do that, I have also made sure that I'm not snapping to grid. So I can toggle between snap to grid and not. So I talked about this last time. If I am in snap to grid mode, if I'm trying to move my playhead around, it's going to snap to the grid. But if I turn that off, I can put this wherever, all the way down to to like the sample level. I can adjust where my playhead is. Okay. Now, there are all sorts of ways that I can make a splice. For instance, split tool. You'll notice that the split tool looks like a razor, right? So I could, for instance, a useful one way that this is useful. Let me find a better example here. So I'm looking at this waveform. I want to splice out this waveform right when it begins and right when it ends. And so I'm going to zoom in at this one particular spot and unmute. So I just want these two little shapes, and this is what they sound like.
Weather.
So just the weather, right? So that means I can zoom in. I'm going to zoom in to see a little bit better here, okay? And I can stretch out this track so I have a better sense of where this word begins. Now, when I'm zoomed in closer, I can be much more precise and say, okay, here is sort of the noise in the room that's happening. He's not talking. But as I zoom in, I'm looking for when that behavior in the air changes, and it's right around here. So when I'm zoomed in like this, I can use what they call the split tool, and it looks like a razor blade. So now I've got this split tool, and what I can do is, bam. That way I can be super precise, and now I'm going to move out. I'm going to toggle back to my arrow because I don't want to just be splitting this waveform all over the place. And then I can zoom in again. What's nice about moving the playhead around and zooming is the zoom will always be centered around your playhead. So zooming in, and it looks like his voice kind of trails out at around here. So I'll take this and splice it here. Now I'm going to zoom out again, and I have spliced, and again, where this would be exactly like the 90-degree splice that we were just talking about when we were looking at the pictures of magnetic tape. And I've spliced out just this one word, weather. So now I can drag this to another track. I can move it around to wherever I want it. I can mute. And now we can listen to it down here. And let's loop it.
Weather, 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 weather.
Okay, so I have spliced it out. Now, let's say I'm going to press copy, and I'm going to press paste. So I've pressed copy paste, and this has pasted two copies of the same thing, weather, on top of each other. I'm going to press play again.
Weather, 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 weather.
Now, even though they're on top of each other, that hasn't made it doubly as loud. Now, why is that? Think back to the picture of magnetic tape, and you had one tape underneath another, one piece of tape underneath another piece of tape. Now, think when I'm moving around the top waveform, um, you'll see, okay, so the bottom waveform is still underneath there. And now I'm kind of moving this around, right? Now, this might make it a little more obvious. So now I'm going to select both waveforms, and I'm going to loop those. Okay, so right now, there is a hard 90-degree cut, a hard 90-degree splice between these two, okay? We are going to experiment with changing the angle of this splice. Okay, so I'm going to widen this up so it's easier to see and zoom in a little bit. So this change in shading here lets me know that these two waveforms are overlapping each other. Now, what I can do is, there are a couple ways to do this. Let me start. What I'm going to do is, what I'm going to do is show you guys the inspector view first, because we're going to do a lot of things in the inspector view. But I will also show you a quicker way to do a angled splice after that. So I'm going to go to the inspector view, where I go over to the side here, and there's this letter I up top. If I click that, it opens this side menu. And probably when it opens up for you the first time, it will look something more like this. Up top, this is information that has more to do with the track. However, there is a at the very bottom there, you can drag up this portion of the window, and this is all of the things that you can do to the waveforms within the track. So right now I have this splice of the Hamlet waveform selected, and these are the different things, the different techniques I can perform on this splice of Hamlet. So let's start by experimenting with fading in. So I'm going to move this up, right? Now, okay, so you can see that this fade also looks like a angled splice, right? And so now if we listen to that, so what I've done is really, this is just, it's a splice, but it's also an increase in volume, right? An increase in amplitude. And you can see that affect the wave shape itself. So, let me reduce this again so I can kind of go, all right. Right? So here I am. So you can see how as I change this fade, it's changing the shape of the waveform accordingly, right? So it's decreasing the amplitude until the splice gets up to the top of the window of the waveform. Okay, so what happens down here if we try to fade out the track underneath? Okay, so now what we've created is a crossfade, or you could imagine this as an angled splice. So okay, so this has covered splices and fades. And we can think of fades as an angled splice if we're thinking of it as analogically similar to analog tape splicing techniques. Now, whether you how you make decisions about fades and hard cuts is up to you. It's an aesthetic. It's an aesthetic thing, right? Sometimes you might want a smooth transition between two sounds. Sometimes you might want a very abrupt transition. For instance, we can, now that we have this crossfade going on, now this would be mimicking analog tape, but we can get with digital, we can get a lot more intricate with the shapes of our splices. So okay, so I'm able to create these like exponential splices rather than just angled ones. I could have just angled ones. These are all things that you can sort of toy around with. The point is that these shapes that you're creating are just like tape splices, and what they do is they fade from one splice of audio, one waveform to another. Okay, let's see. Sometimes I've found that when you move the fade very close to the end of the splice, it becomes difficult to grab it. So I'll have to kind of go in and adjust here first so that I can easily grab the end. See, yeah. All right. So let's move this in. Okay, so here we are. We have this weather thing going on. Let's play around with it a little bit more. I'm going to select the second half of this audio, or the second splice, the copy, I guess we could say. And let's try doing some other things. How about let's try speeding it up. So over here, I'm going to change the speed. That was a lot. All right. So what I've done is change the speed, even though it says speed up. What I've done is changed it to 0.5, and automatically, what happened was this waveform became twice as long, which makes sense, right? Because I have reduced the speed. I have divided it in half or multiplied it by 0.5. So I've halved it. So we would imagine that we would hear it be an octave lower. Of course, right now it's looping to where where the waveform was at normal speed. So I'm not going to change the loop. Okay. What's happened, right? It has not changed the pitch. Very interesting. So here, let me grab this. So so this is something that we can do in digital that we can't do in analog. If we were to slow down the speed of tape to half speed, we would reduce the pitch. Why is that? Well, if we're slowing down the speed of the tape, we're also slowing down the speed of or we're slowing down the frequency of the pitches. So, and we know that frequency, the faster, the more hertz you have, or the more cycles per second of the waveform, the higher the pitch. This right now, when I changed the speed of the second waveform here to 0.5, it did not change the pitch, and you can hear that because we're fading in out of the original speed and into the slower speed. So what Studio One had to do in order to make this work, if I zoom in, it had to keep the frequency the same, but the speed had to be doubled or halved. Excuse me. The speed had to be halved. So, in other words, it's kind of like it has to figure out ways to make copies of the wave cycle. So let's see if we can zoom in. I'm going to zoom in here, and here we see, right? So one time through the cycle would be like where the tape head is now to here. Now let's bring the speed of this back to normal. Oh no, that we'll lose it. Here, let's see. Okay, this would be better because remember, like if I bring the speed back to normal, the wave the splice will shrink. So I have to go back over here. So one time through the cycle. Now if I bring the speed back up, whoa. So what Studio One has to do, it's really hard to do this slowly. What Studio One has to do is keep the same cycles per second, but stretch out the number of cycles. So it has to be the same number of it has to be the same cycles per second, but more of them, more cycles. So I've reduced it to 0.26. Let's zoom out a little bit so we can see this. Now it should be really slow, and so it'll be it'll be half the speed of half speed. Now, when you're doing this, eventually when you start really slowing down time, really what we're talking about is time stretching here, you start to hear these digital artifacts when you get it slow enough. Let's bring it down even more. Whoops. So let's bring it down to 15%. Oh, now I did the whole thing. Oh, well. Yeah. Let's bring it back to 1. I didn't want to do both waveforms. I just want you. Okay. Because I still want to hear the crossfade between normal speed and really slow. So let's take this down to 15%. Okay. And zoom out a little bit so we can see the... Okay. So now we're really going to hear the digital artifacts that are coming out of this time stretching. So that kind of weird digitally sort of buzz that you hear, especially on there, that is what we're hearing is this sort of copying of one cycle, and it kind of produces this kind of digital artifact, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, sometimes when I'm playing around with this, I like the result of the digital distortion. Okay, let's take this back to normal speed and return the loop to where it was. Whoops. Okay, so here we are back with our crossfade. Now let's try changing. Let's try transposing. So for Studio One, speed up is like time stretch, and that might be like if you're working in another DAW, it might be that that might be exactly how the term they have for it in there. And here it's speed up. Okay, let's try. So what this transpose number allows me to do is to change the pitch of the waveform. So now it has not changed the speed of the waveform, but it has reduced the pitch. So if we were working with magnetic tape, this would be impossible. Like to bring the pitch down in magnetic tape, you also have to bring down the speed. But here I'm able to transpose it. With Studio One, it has you transpose by semitone or by keys on a piano. So this is minus however many keys on a piano, and this would be down. Whoops, this would be down an octave, which happens to be, which would be the result of making it, if it were a magnetic tape, making it half the speed. So so you can really hear that octave there. I could also increase the pitch, and let's give it a major third on top. So let's hear how that sounds. Okay, I'm going to take it back down an octave. So again, it's keeping the same speed, but it's reduced the pitch. So if I really wanted to have the effect, that if I'm really looking for the effect of like the record got slowed down or the tape player got slowed down, in Studio One, I have to do both a speed change and a pitch change. So if I were to now change the speed and the pitch, so I've reduced it by an octave and I've changed the speed. Did I do it to both again? Yeah, okay, good. So let me zoom out so we can hear, we can see and hear this whole thing. So if I'm trying to reproduce the effect of slowing down a record to half speed, here is how I do it. Okay, so so this takes us through time stretching or speeding up in the terminology of Studio One, pitch shifting or transposing, and we've also covered the different splices and talked about how a splice is also like a fade. We've got two more things to address here now, and those are, gain and normalization. Okay, so gain in digital, really, we're just thinking about how much we are increasing the overall amplitude. So right now we're looking at this waveform. And if we're imagining the line that goes through the middle of this waveform as 0 and the very top, let's say, as 1, we have an amplitude of we have amplitude peaks here, well, really here, right? So I can now also increase the gain, and let's look at what happens when I do that. Okay, so by increasing the gain all the way up to plus 24, of course, I don't want to press play because I've increased it so much the waveform is like outside of the window. That will create distortion. Now, as we all know, distortion is not always a bad thing. It can be an aesthetic choice, but we also want to be careful while we're experimenting with this, and we don't want to blow out our speakers or our eardrums. So I'm going to go take this back to 0, no gain, right? So there's no additional energy put into the waveform. I'm not increasing it by anything. So 0 gain is just 0 change. If I'm going to reduce the gain, then I'm going to reduce what was the energy behind the original waveform, and we can see that how that is connected to my fade. So let me press play again. Okay. So gain is really just increasing. You're just but what is happening is you're multiplying all of these numbers, all of these amplitude numbers, by some multiplier. So if we were to zoom in, sorry, let's go into what we were changing the gain on. Now, as I'm increasing the gain, I'm just multiplying the whole wave shape by the same number. So, and it kind of makes sense that you would have this. You might be able to notice a general exponential shift in how much different parts of the waveform are increasing, which would make sense, right? Because if they're all being multiplied by the same number, say they're all being multiplied, well, they're all being multiplied by 10 right now. Say this is 0.5. So, 0.5 times 10 would be 5. Say this is 5. 0.5 times 10 would be 50. So, as you're increasing gain, the peaks are going to be increased more than the smaller little wiggles. So that's something to remember, the sort of exponential quality of gain. So related to gain, we have, and gain is something that comes directly out of analog terminology. Really, all it is increasing gain is increasing wattage to the signal. So you're just increasing energy to the electrical signal. That's all it is. And as I'm changing that, you can imagine if this is an electrical current going through, right? If I just put more power into it, and it's going to be the same amount of power that I'm putting into the entire signal, everything will increase accordingly. So I'm just putting more power in, right? When we're talking about gain. So gain is coming straight out of analog terminology, and it works the same way. Normalization is something that is new to digital, and let's look at what happens when we normalize. So we have this pitch shifted, time stretched weather. I've been demonstrating changing gain. I have it selected. I'm going to press normalize. Now, what normalize does is it finds the peak of the signal, the highest point in the signal, and it asks how much do I need to multiply that peak by to get it to be 0 decibels, right? So right at the top, not overbloating the speakers, but just the right amount of volume that I need. So it finds the highest point, the highest amplitude in the waveform. It asks, how much do I need to multiply the highest point, the peak in the waveform, to get to 0 decibels? And then it says, okay, multiply everything else by that. So I have this splice selected. I clicked normalize. It brought this peak up to 0. And everything else was multiplied by that same number. Now, of course, everything else is not reaching that 0 point, you know, but that's good, right? Because we want to still hear the envelope of the sound. So if I'm going to unselect normalize, and it reduces. And so now let me press play.
Weather, 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 weather.
So one thing that you'll notice is let's try normalizing the first one. So
weather, 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 weather.
Okay, so normalizing again, it finds the peak. It asks, what do I need to multiply the peak by to reach unity, to reach 0 decibels? And whatever that number is, multiply everything else by that number. So that is a digital technique that is its gain, but it's a way to very quickly make a determination on a whole waveform, a whole track, and adjust the gain accordingly by like a very precise calculation. Okay, I want to look at 2 other things before we head out. So we've covered splices, we've covered fades, we've covered time stretching, we've covered pitch shifting, and we've covered gain and normalization. Let's look at one last thing, and that is understanding the relationship between these tracks and understanding the relationships between these tracks and what we're hearing. So if I go to my view menu and I want to look at the console. So Studio One is separated into all of these different windows. And it can get really confusing when you're trying to navigate them all. So just remember, when in doubt, you can always go up to your view menu and figure out what is displayed and what isn't, and you can close a whole bunch of stuff. So, for instance, I can look at just this one track and look at all of the waveforms that are within it. But I can also look at the mix console. Right now, we're just going to look at the mix console. And what this is like a mixing board. So I only have 2 tracks, right? I have the track I'm editing on, and I have the track where I dropped in the Shakespeare recording. As I'm toggling back and forth between them up top, on my timeline, I'm selecting them down here on my mixing board. Same thing as I'm going back and forth. Right? So here in my mixing board is another place where I'm also controlling volume. This is separate from what's going on with the waveform. We're going to dig into this next time for the next lecture. The reason I'm bringing it up is because I'm assuming that people would end up in this window somehow, and they might become confused about the difference between putting gain directly onto a waveform and changing gain in the mixer. They are different. So just so I can show you this, and then we'll leave because we're going to dig into mixing and automation next time. But just to demonstrate this, so right.
Weather, weather, weather.
Okay, I have reduced the volume, the gain on this channel. If I go back, and I'm doing that in the mix console, if I go back into onto my timeline and I try to do some gain changes again, it won't matter, right? Like if I increase the gain, sorry, wrong one. If I increase the gain, it won't matter because the mixer is turned all the way down, right? But if I now increase the gain on the pitch shifted splice, and then I go back to my console. Now, if I bring this up, we will start to hear much. Okay. The relationship between what's happening in the inspector or what's happening on the waveforms and what's happening in the mixer is something that is going to take a while for us to really learn and figure out. This is just a way to demonstrate that what is happening in between your manipulations of the waveform and what comes out of your speaker, there are other steps. We're going to learn about these other steps, and this will all become clear. So for now, just focus on what's going on in the inspector window. Next time, we'll start looking at mixing and start exploring the path that this waveform takes before it comes out and we hear it. Okay, so have a great week. I look forward to talking about these issues with you when we come together next time, and we will also start to talk about the next creative assignment and start playing around with audio and coming up with plans for the assignment itself. So one thing I want you to do is start brainstorming about audio sources that you think you would want to collage. Think of it like you're a painter and you need a palette. So what colors do you want to put into your painting? What do you want to collage together? I recommend you all come up with a list where you have categories of things that you want to experiment with. So maybe you have musical sounds, you have nature sounds, you have city sounds, whatever it is, different soundscapes, different types of sounds that you associate with different things. Just kind of start doing some brainstorming on the types of sounds that you want to go find and start to incorporate. Because next time I'm going to show you some online tools for finding high quality wave recordings of all sorts of types of sounds. And then I want us to start thinking about our palette for this sound collage and start thinking about all the different types of sounds that we can combine and the types of ways that we can manipulate them. So in between now and then, I just want you to think about your palette. What types of sounds do you want to go find and start messing with? And then we're going to start looking for them and start making a database of sounds. So when we say palette, right now we're going to start thinking like, oh, it's a database. It's a collection of wave files that you are going to be combining and collaging together. Okay, so next time, have some ideas on the types of sounds you want to experiment with, and I'll show you how to find some of those sounds, and then we'll start dropping them into Studio One and experimenting with them. I look forward to it, and I will see you all then.